Deputy Doherty.
Agus dhéanaar chipan na tííochta do rialtas ar in níos massa mar na bhfuil bhilta infrastructure bonusa a phleanal agus a bhainistiú i gceart. Tá feibanna inar gréas an isce agus leachtra is a chur moll ar na mílte títhe agus a chur iad I mhuil. Taoiseach, for years we've listened to yourself and Taoiseach Micheál Martin say that housing is your #1 priority. Yet every single day we get headlines about government's failures and incompetence putting the delivery of thousands of homes at risk. And take this week alone, Taoiseach. First we had the Central Bank and the SRI tell us and tell the Oireachtas Housing Committee that your government won't meet its housing targets this year or next year, and without a major policy change you won't meet your targets out to 2030. Then roll on Tuesday, on RTE Prime Time, the Irish Council for Social Housing and the state's largest approved housing body, Cluj, confirmed that thousands of much-needed social and affordable housing projects have been delayed because of government red tape and bureaucracy. They say that this now means that 3,000 fewer social and affordable homes will be delivered. For months, Minister James Brown denied that this was a problem, but he has now been found out. And if all that wasn't enough, we come to today. 2 senior civil servants have sounded the alarm over serious infrastructure deficits impacting disastrously on housing delivery. First, we have the Chief Executive of Cian has told the Housing Minister that all households in Dublin face water shortages in the next 5 years. This is due to significant delays in delivering major water supply projects in the capital and your government's failure to invest properly in our creaking water network. The inability to guarantee a water connection is jeopardising the delivery of thousands and thousands of new homes. Then we have the Secretary-General of the Department of Energy issuing another stark warning that housing delivery is at risk because of electricity supply shortages, that data centres are soaking up electricity put in place for future housing. And this problem goes right back to the failure of the government to build capacity in the grid and to modernise the network to meet the challenges of today. But what we're talking about here, Taoiseach, in simple terms, is we're talking about the inability of your government to ensure the very basics: water, electricity connections for houses, the most basic needs in any society. And people are going to be scratching their heads because this state has record surpluses. So money is not the problem. So the problem must be the incompetence and bad decisions made over and over and over again. A government that can't plan and can't get the job done when it comes to critical infrastructure. And this is strangling housing delivery. For the life of me, I can't fathom how government, and I'm sure you'll mention it again, will say with a straight face that you're turned a corner on housing. The truth is, you're going round in circles, all of you, going round in circles on this issue. Your failure to get the basics right to future-proof infrastructure development is coming home to roost, and it's impacting hardest on housing delivery. Taoiseach, a few weeks ago, you made a TikTok video when you stated, "We have a housing emergency. I want the government to start acting like it." Now that raised some eyebrows, seriously. That raised some eyebrows. You've been a minister for 11 years. Your party's been in government for 14 years. And you're doing TikTok videos saying that the government should act like that there's a housing emergency. It has been put on the record over and over again. Uisce Éireann, Secretary-General of the Department of Environment, the largest AHB, telling us that your failure to plan and the fact that your Department of Housing is stalling and has now put at risk thousands of social and affordable housing. So can I ask you, do you accept what the Central Bank and the SRI has said, that you're going to miss your targets for housing this year? And if so, what are you really going to deliver this year? Do you accept that your minister has now meant that 3,000 less social and affordable homes will be delivered because of the delays in his department? And what are you going to do with the issues of water and electricity supply that is so vitally needed?
Please. Thanks very much, Deputy Doherty. And let me say, housing is the biggest domestic challenge that this country faces, that people in this country face. It's the biggest societal challenge on a domestic level, and it's now a real economic challenge as well. We have to do more when it comes to housing, and we were very clear, the parties that formed this government and the independents who supported that, if returned to government, we would work to increase the scale of housing delivery. You put forward your plans as well, which I don't think convinced many. You talk about record surpluses, and I'm glad you do, but you just kind of brush over them as though they kind of happen by accident. The reason we're in a position that we have record surpluses, the reason we're going to be able to spend a hell of a lot more money on water, on energy, on housing, on putting in place the services that people need in this country, is because of the way we've managed the economy of this country, working with the Irish people over the last number of years. These things don't happen by accident. There has been, objectively, factually, a significant increase in the progress of the delivery of housing in recent years. We've seen more than 133,000 new build homes delivered between 2020 and 2024, and 92,500 of those homes were delivered just between 2022 and 2024, up nearly 50% on the previous 3 years. So it's objectively true that we saw a significant uplift in housing. It's also true that it's not enough, and it's also true that that has somewhat stalled or reached a plateau. And therefore, we now have to look at what we can do to take it to the next level, to be able to achieve the ambition that we have of 300,000 more homes being delivered in this country by 2030. And we're very clear in relation to what we need to do, and much of the issues that you've highlighted are key parts of that jigsaw. Planning reform, making sure, and we'd appreciate your assistance on this too, that people don't keep objecting to the delivery of housing in their communities as well, saying they're in favour of houses here and they're against them in their own community. Resourcing on board Planola. We can come back on this in a moment. Resourcing on board Planola properly, in enacting and commencing all the various provisions of the Planning and Development Act so we can speed up the delivery of planning, because planning decisions are holding back the delivery of homes and infrastructure, increasing the zoned land for housing, and that's what the National Planning Framework that the Minister for Housing brought before this House was all about, making sure that we have enough zoned land to deliver the homes that we need in each of our communities, and yes, providing more funding and a better way of delivering key infrastructure like water and like energy. Now, it's hard to take a lecture from you in relation to water after you politicised the issue of water so much to try and stymie progress in recent years, and you continue to mislead people about the government's intention in relation to Irish water. No, just yours, in relation to Irish water. No, the misleading of people in relation to Irish water is your fault. And we've been very clear. Please. We've been very clear in relation to water that we are going to have to spend an awful lot more on Uisce Éireann. I met the Chief Executive of Uisce Éireann myself for a number of hours last Friday, and Uisce Éireann have presented to Government real plans that if we can provide them with significant additional capital funding over the summer period with the review of the National Development Plan, they will be able to, I'm sure you'll be delighted to know, provide enough water infrastructure to deliver and enable the delivery of the homes we need. Similarly, in relation to... I'm not sure who's playing leader today, whether it's you or yours, I'm not sure if this is the audition for the next leader of Sinn Féin, but I'd like to speak if that's okay. We will publish a new housing plan. Yeah, they don't want the answer, you see, because they're not about the answer.
Deputy O'Brien, please allow the Minister to
answer. I speak. Thanks very much. I'm sure Pearse doesn't need your help. So we're going to produce a new housing plan in July, and you can be quite assured, Deputy Doherty, as part of that new housing plan will be significant additional funding and enabling provisions for Irish water and indeed for energy. We've been very clear. We were very clear in the election of what we would do with the proceeds from the Apple account in terms of how that money would be deployed as well. So I agree on this point. The delivery of water infrastructure, the delivery of energy are now key enablers if we're serious about reaching the 300,000 homes that are needed to be delivered in this country between now and 2030. And you will see week in, week out now actions from government to get to that point. And you saw just the first in a range of announcements you can expect with the memo we had this week in relation to the extension of planning permissions that were due to expire.
Deputy Doherty.
Yeah, look, Taoiseach, it's time to get real. The ESRI, the Central Bank, Secretary-General of the Department of Environment, Uisce Éireann, the approved housing bodies, the list goes on and on and on and on and on. You are failing on the basic issues. As Deputy O'Brien has rightly pointed out, Uisce Éireann has been looking for that money for a year and a half. Across all of our constituencies, there's projects that can't go ahead because of lack of investment. It's happening in Gweedore, it's happening in Dublin city centre. That's the reality. The reality is, after over a decade of you as Minister and Fine Gael in government for nearly a decade and a half, we have serious basic issues of water and electricity that is putting the most basic right, a roof over your head, in jeopardy. And to add insult to injury, We have people who want to build homes. AHBs. The woman beside you objected to this 8,000 homes. Maybe have a word with her. I've never objected to a house, but the minister beside you objected to 8,000 homes. 8,000 homes. 8,000 homes. With respect, to add insult to injury, we have an approved housing body, the largest in the state, taking to the national airwaves saying that 3,000 social and affordable houses will not be delivered as a result of red tape, bureaucracy and delays by the minister and his department. Now, I put it to you, you're going to miss your targets again. Do you accept that? And what do you say about the fact that 3,000 social and affordable homes will not be delivered now, as should be delivered, as people want to deliver them, but because of the delays and red tape in your department?
Well, over the last number of years that I've been in government, we've seen a very significant increase in the number of homes delivered in this country. And we saw 133,000 new homes delivered between 2020 and 2024, with 92,500 of them delivered between 2022 and 2024. You never acknowledge that bit. You never acknowledge that we've rebuilt a construction sector, rebuilt an economy, now have a national planning framework, the biggest overhaul of planning legislation in a generation, if not ever, and a real opportunity now, if you wanted to work constructively and not politicise the issue of housing, to actually make real progress in the time ahead. We now have the legislative background. We have the legislative. I'm not going to be shouted down by the deputy. I'm going to speak. I'm going to speak. Thank you.
Deputy O'Brien,
would
you mind listening to the minister in his reply, please? No, have some manners. Have some manners. Tarnish them.
So we are going to, between now and the month of July, work on a housing plan, not a glossy document, a targeted list of actions that we can take in relation to water, in relation to energy, in relation to planning, that will get us to 300,000 homes. And I can assure you, we have the money, we have the capital to make this happen. What we now need is the political support across this House and in the communities to drive on delivery. And I hope you'll support the establishment of a housing activation office that's going to do exactly what you say: bring in people from Irish Water, bring in people from the local authorities, put them in an office working together to break down those silos so we can deliver the homes to our people.
Thank you. Deputy Cian O'Callaghan, please. Deputy Cian O'Callaghan. Deputies, on both sides, it's pointless me having to try to shout you down and then shout the opposition down and try to get the business done. If you respect each other, respect the time that you have, we get on just fine. And everyone would be able to make their points adequately. Deputy O'Callaghan.
Tánaiste, disability services in this country are chaotic and threadbare. Families of children with additional needs have to fight for the very basics. All they want for their child is to be able to access an education and appropriate services, a chance for their child to fulfil their full potential. The very first step for most is to get an assessment of need, and there are now over 15,000 children waiting more than the legal time limit of 6 months for an assessment. Tánaiste, I've met children, I'm sure you have as well, who can't yet speak and are left waiting years for speech and language therapy. Year after year passes. As they grow older, their isolation from other children grows. Early intervention would make an absolute world of difference. Tánaiste, routinely, whenever this issue is mentioned, the government blames a High Court decision from 2022. I think it's helpful to detail what was in that judgment. It found that an accelerated 90-minute assessment process in which children were diagnosed with a disability but not told what disability they had was illegal. And it found a child's needs should determine the nature and length of the assessment. I wonder what part of that judgment that you have a problem with. I've heard you refer to it as rigid. The only rigidity in that judgment is a staunch defence of the rights of children with disabilities. Tánaiste, that judgment was delivered more than 3 years ago. How long more are you going to continue to blame it for your government's failure to respond to this crisis? When I asked the Taoiseach about this last week, he let the mask slip. He said the government hadn't acted on the judgment because it couldn't agree what to do. That's quite an extraordinary admission. Tánaiste, is it the case that Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael simply cannot get their act together and decide what to do? Tánaiste, this indecision from government is having a huge impact on children with additional needs and their families. 15,000 children are now overdue an assessment of need. That's going to grow to 25,000 by the end of the year. More and more children are getting left behind. Taoiseach, there are actions that you can take now to significantly boost recruitment in key services. The pay and numbers strategy must go. It's placing a stranglehold on recruitment in primary care. We need proper investment in staff with secure contracts to boost employment in primary care and in children's disability network teams. So, Taoiseach, can you confirm the Taoiseach's admission that the government has been unable to agree what to do over the last 3 years? And at this late stage, have you finally decided what you're going to do following the High Court judgment?
I want to thank Deputy Colin for raising this issue, and he is right. This is an area in which there's a huge amount of work needed to make progress. There's no doubt about that. And I would make the point at the outset that I don't think any one strand of work will get us to where we need to get to. I think we're going to need to do 4 or 5 very significant things and at the same time. And that is where the focus of government is at. It's where the focus of Minister Foley and Minister Naughton is at. And they updated the Cabinet Committee on Disability on this in the month of May. We're due to have a further meeting of the Cabinet Committee this month in relation to disability. So let me give you a sense of a couple of the things. So firstly, in relation to assessment of need, can I agree with you on this point? Every child, the right of a child and the right that a child has to access an assessment of need needs to remain. I really believe that, the government believes that, and I can assure you all the parts of the government believe that. I also believe the next thing though, I do think that we need to look at how that piece of legislation works. This has been my view for a very long period of time. I think it's the view of many people who work in clinical practice. I think it's also the view of many parents as well, who want to get clarity and have a system that can more efficiently, but in a clinically appropriate way, clinician-led, determine the length of time required for the assessment. I believe in clinicians, not politicians or judges, determining that, and that's the piece that we want to get right. Because roughly speaking, the same article you referenced around the 25,000 children potentially, that same article referenced that, I think from my memory, around a third of children, when they go through the process of assessment of need, will be determined not to actually have a disability in that kind of defined sense. We need to give those children that clarity more quickly. And around 30% of therapist time now is being spent on assessment of needs. I'm not suggesting this is easy, by the way, and we do want to work constructively to get this right, but I'd be misleading you if I didn't say that we're going to bring forward reforms in relation to the legislation around assessment of need. The second thing we've got to do, and we are doing, and we've made the decision to do it, is establish a national therapy service for education. There are far too many parents who feel such a sense of relief when their child finally gets a place, particularly in a special school, to then say, oh, actually, hang on a second, that's great, I've got the education place, but what about the speech and language? What about the OT? What about the physio? I think it makes sense, I think we agree on this, having therapy services in schools, starting with special schools, then into special classes, then into mainstream schools. And Minister McEntee has received government approval to proceed with that, and I expect the recruitment for that to be able to commence very, very shortly, as in commence in advance of the new school year. The third thing we need to do, and I hear you on the pay and number strategy, and I remember checking this out, because if there was a situation where there's a piece of paper that's saying there's a cap here that's stopping speech and language therapists being hired, I'd agree with you 100%. Last time I checked this in recent days, though, there are funded vacant posts in the therapies today as well. So we do have to look at that whole issue in relation to why those posts are vacant, but it's not genuinely because there's a cap on recruitment. There's funded posts today that are vacant. We have taken a decision to significantly increase the number of therapy posts in universities. Minister Lawless has led on that as well, so we can have a greater pipeline of graduates. So I'm very happy to work. I would like to work, as would government, in a collaborative way with people in relation to this. But this is the thing, we need to kick off a number of major bodies of work across this House in the next few weeks.
Taoiseach, I asked you, would you confirm what the Taoiseach said last week, that there's been indecision from government on this, that you couldn't agree over the last 3 years? I think you did imply that from your answer, that you haven't been able to agree on what to do. You're saying there needs to be reforms to legislation, but it's 3 years since the High Court judgment. So if that's your intention to do that, and I think that judgment was very good in terms of vindicating the rights of children with disabilities and additional needs, but if that's your intention, why has it been taking you so long to even decide what to do? This crisis is getting worse and worse by the day, creating huge stress. In terms of children's disability network teams, yes, there's vacant posts, but they've also been hit in terms of being capped on the number of places they have. Teams that used to have 8 or 10 people on it, being told you're down to 2 people now, you're going to stay at 2 people. The remaining people in those teams saying we can't possibly cope with the workload? How can we continue doing this? That's done huge damage to retaining staff in the area and indeed to recruiting staff to fill vacant posts. So when are you going to get a grip to this? When are you going to make decisions? When are you going to act? And will you confirm what the Taoiseach said, that you've been unable to agree what to do for the last 3 years?
Thank you, Deputy.
So there is an agreed way forward, and we have a very clear view forward in relation to amending the legislation and reforming the legislation and the model around assessment of need. And we want to work with people in good faith to get this right, including, most importantly, parents and those who carry out assessments of needs, the clinical professions as well. And you can expect engagement from us on that very, very shortly. When it comes to recruitment, look, we have seen an additional 272 staff in our Children's Disability Network teams in the last year alone. And Minister Foley and Minister Naughton are actively engaging on further measures in relation to retaining existing staff in the system and attracting new entrants. Secondly, we have seen that decision in relation to significantly ramping up the number of therapy places in third levels. Thirdly, another thing we're working at that probably comes across your constituency office, certainly mine, we're engaging with Coru to examine how we can speed up the process around recognition of qualifications for staff coming from overseas. I do want parents looking in, though, to know in the here and now, we're also taking action. There were proposals that as we build up the capacity in the public sector, and as we bring about the reforms, we would also use capacity in the private sector. And I want to assure parents that we have made a waiting list initiative available where there's procurement of private assessments, and a further 10 million has been provided this year. That's seen an increase, an extra 30% of assessments of needs carried out in the last year. In other words, that's 4,162 carried out in 2024 compared to 3,205 in 2023.
Thank you, Taoiseach. Deputy Catherine Connolly.
Taoiseach, I'm returning to Palestine and the genocide that's going on there. And we all this morning listened to the report of the Palestinian ambassador to the UN on RT this morning, a report of what he said at the UN. Flames and hunger are devouring Palestinian children. We also listened to an eyewitness account of a doctor on the ground. That's today, tomorrow again, yesterday. And I ask myself, I'll just give a few figures, and then I'm asking the question, how have we gotten to this point? How have we let this happen? 54,000 Palestinians, including 15,613 children dead. The Lancet, of course, places the figure much higher for deaths and injured. More than 630,000 people have been displaced. At least 28 aid workers killed since the 1st of May. An average of 1 worker a day. Since October the 7th, 2023, 452 workers. And you know what Israel does today? It announces that it intends to establish 22 new settlements. And so I ask myself, and I put myself into the question, how have we allowed this happen? And we've let it happen because we've bought into a narrative that has been pushed for over 100 years, I'd say 140 at this time, that Jewish people were a people without a land, and Palestine was a country without a people. And arising from that, then, the narrative took hold that they were entitled to that land, notwithstanding the Nakba in 1948, a new Nakba, and I come back to this book, happening under our very eyes and noses, with the narrative that Israel is the only democracy. It is the bulwark against the Islamic religion and against Muslims. And we have all bought into that to a certain extent. And when the Hamas attack happened on the 7th of October, which we are on record for condemning, I'm also said history did not start on that day. On the 6th of October, and I haven't much time, but I'll read out some of the bullet points. Israel controlled most of the Palestine in complete defiance of international law, the 6th of October. The people were kept under a blockade, electricity for less than a few hours a day. It was continuing the blocking of most of Gaza's population. Israel at that point had built up an extensive infrastructure in the West Bank exclusively for Jews against international law. In 2023, on the 6th of October, Israel had already killed 250 Palestinians by October, including almost 50 children, in the most aggressive settler push across the West Bank for almost 2 decades, and so on. I'm quoting from a new book about to be published tonight by Fintan Drury. I invite you all to go along to Hodges and Figgis. A more comprehensive, fair analysis of what has happened I can't find, except for the 100 Years History book as well. Nakba too. And so I'm here today saying, Taoiseach, it is time for us to reflect, to stop the cognitive dissonance where we praise ourselves for taking the best action in relation to Palestine, and ask how an independent sovereign state, a republic, is standing over a narrative that is utterly false in relation to Israel. Good for your forbearance.
Taoiseach.
Well, thanks very much, Deputy Connolly. So, I mean, we're not standing over any false narrative. We're reiterating long-standing foreign policy, and I think the long-standing policy of the people of Ireland, that there needs to be a two-state solution in the Middle East, that the State of Israel has every right to exist in peace and security, and the people of Palestine have every right to have a sovereign state that exists in peace and security as well. And as we know in this country, better than many, the only way to get to that point is through political dialogue, and not through the genocidal activity that we're seeing from the Netanyahu government. I would make this point, and I'm not suggesting you didn't, but I would just make this point, that I always like to differentiate between the government of Israel and the people of Israel, because I believe there's many people in Israel who would be utterly horrified at the decisions being taken by the Netanyahu government, which are genocidal, which are war crimes, which are starving children, and which is in breach of international law. Nobody in this House comes in and seeks to praise what Ireland is doing, but what we do seek to do in this House is outline that as a small country in the European Union, we are doing everything we can to maximise the pressure on the international community to help bring about a ceasefire. And I'd suggest all political parties need to use their own political networks and links in European countries, in the United States and everywhere else, to try and help amplify that as well. Because what we are seeing happening today, and what we have been seeing happening now for a very significant period of time, is despicable and is an act of evil. This is evil at work here. There's just no way about that. This is evil. And why I say it's evil is this: the people of this great country have, through their own taxes, paid for a very significant amount of aid to get into Gaza. Enough food on trucks paid for by the Irish people to feed at least 6,000 people in Palestine. And for 4 months, those trucks have been parked in Jordan. And there's only one reason, no other reason, as to why those trucks can't get in, and that's the Israeli blockade. And while we want to see an immediate end to the conflict, of course we do, we want to see a ceasefire, we want to see the release of all the hostages. In the here and now, today, the people in Gaza who are starving could be fed. And it is a political choice of the Israeli government that is also a war crime not to allow that aid in. So in Ireland, we'll continue to do everything we can, and we'll continue to work constructively with opposition. I thought there was a very good motion put down by the Labour Party that we didn't just not oppose, that I'll proactively work with you to advance. I've had very good engagement in the Seanad this morning with Senator Francis Black in relation to the occupied Palestinian territories, and we are now the first country in Europe. And I say that in the hope that other countries now need to look to Ireland and say, well, hang on, if this little country on the periphery of Europe can pass a piece of legislation to ban trade with the occupied Palestinian territory, why can't we do it in other countries as well? And I call today, and I hope everybody in this House calls today, for other countries to replicate what we're doing. And on the issue of services, before I'm misrepresented again, as I constantly seem to be, no difficulty in relation to services being included if we can find a legal way forward in relation to that. There isn't a policy difference. So we have a lot of work to do in relation to this, and I don't ever buy into the narrative, opposition good, government bad. We're all appalled, we're all sickened at the genocide we're witnessing.
You may all well be appalled and sickened, but you're refusing to face the elephant in the roof. Israel has an umbilical cord attachment to America. They are the biggest supplier of arms to America. America is the biggest supplier of arms, followed by the EU. And you're waiting for a morally corrupt and inept EU to take action. They're the second biggest supplier of arms to the genocide. Let's call a spade a spade. We have no difficulty, and you've had no difficulty criticising Russia. The same condemnation has not been used in relation to Israel, identifying it as the aggressor that's perpetuating genocide. Your facial expressions don't help, Taoiseach, in that manner. This is far too serious.
I've just said that.
Well, you can stand
Israel
up,
is
you can say
genocide.
a lot of things, and then you watch Shannon being used, an occupied territories bill that is going nowhere at the moment. Trade with Europe. We are a small country. It's time that we led, given our history. It's time we called for an absolute ceasefire, led in the UN, and make our words mean something and call out the narrative for what it is. And the narrative is Israel is a rogue state. It is not a democratic state. It is absolutely going. That narrative has allowed a congressman come here just 2 months ago into this room who has said, go in and beat the SHIT guarantee out of Palestine. A congressman feted by one of your colleagues and by another colleague in Fianna Fáil. How dare you shake your head? You stand up.
You have to conclude,
Stand up and account for what we're going to do when you say there are war crimes and a genocide.
Yeah, thanks. I hope I'll get an extra 38 seconds as well, because there was a greatest load of palaver being levelled at me there. So you have such vitriolic dislike for Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil that you cannot ever actually come above and rise to the moment. We are the first government in the European Union to say what Israel is doing is genocide. Do you hear that, Deputy? It is genocide.
They're committing war crimes,
and we're going to pass the occupied Palestinian territory.
Good.
Okay, we're going to pass that. We're going to pass it. We're going to pass it as quickly as possible. It's going to go to the Foreign Affairs Committee in the month of June. While you're standing here just throwing brickbats at me, we're working to support the people of Palestine. And the only chamber I ever go into in the entire world where people don't acknowledge that Ireland, the government, the people of Ireland are standing with the people of Palestine, standing up for human rights, standing up for international law, is here when you get up and distort with your ideology the actions of this government. I'm proud of the people of this country. I'm proud that we went into an election and it didn't matter what party you were in. You stood up and said, we are going to support the people of Palestine. Get beyond yourself with this narrative of you have all the moral authority and we're terrible people. I'm disgusted and sickened watching children dying on our television screens. And every day I come to work and work with all people in here to do our best to show leadership at a time of horrific conflict.
Call Deputy Michael.
There you go. You're at it again. Hold your sign up.
Please, sorry. Deputy Michael Fitzmaurice.
Clock is going.
No, we'll stop the clock.
Because you originate from
Deputy Michael Fitzmaurice.
You were well aware a few months ago, in the end of January, there was a devastating storm in the West, the Midlands and the North West. In fairness, Deputy Cleary and Deputy Healy-Rae are well familiar with the devastation that has been caused. But 4 months later, and I know Minister O'Donovan has had meetings with the different communications outfits. We are seeing in parts of Roscommon and East Galway the likes of Craig's. I sent you a photo this morning of Craig's, where there's a six line for communications for phones. The local people had to get a ratchet strap and tie the pole back. And it broke and they went and had to do it again. And since 4 months ago this happened, and the pole is still thrown there. Areas like Clonfad, Ballymo, a whole number of areas are left devastated without phone lines. And it's not about the phone line, because in some cases they have gone back and they have repaired the broadband. But the phone line is a lifeline to the elderly people for when you need to basically have your panic button. And I would ask you and your government, and I know your minister had meetings with them, I acknowledge that, I would ask you and your government to put the pressure on, and I would also look that the communications regulator would start taking the finger out to the likes of AIR, because they should be ashamed of themselves around this country the way they have treated the people that has been affected in that area. And following on from that, and I know that there's 2 ministers here in agriculture, in Clonbanov and Carabehy area, Coney Island area, Gortigani, over the last few weeks there has been a huge amount of forestry burned. And I would ask your government, and I know Deputy Healy-Rae has talked about a reconstitution grant for the windblown timber. An awful lot of people had timber over the last few weeks burned. All you can do is basically cut it down now because it's smothered after the fires. I would ask you that when you're bringing in the reconstitution grant for those people that has been affected in the last few months, that your government would help those people, because after 20 years, you know there's no insurance on most of it. This has been devastating in that area, and I would ask you to consider under the reconstitution, it's only a small token of help, because they have lost everything. Whatever about the people in the windblown timber, at least they can try and cut it now and try and get it to sawmills. But where it has got burdened, it's destroyed. You bring in a wood chipper, and whatever is there, you try and chip it up. But they have lost everything. And I would ask you that in the coming months, when you're doing the reconstitution grants, would you consider those people to try and include them along with the windblown people or the wind-blown timber as well. But those are the two items, Taoiseach, that I would ask you that your government would address. Thank you.
Thank Deputy Fitzmaurice for raising this important issue, and in fairness to him, I want to thank him for raising it consistently in terms of the aftermath of Storm Éowyn and the impact that it's had on people across our country, but most particularly perhaps the very long and elongated impact that it has had on people living in rural or more dispersed communities, many of which I know he'd represent in his constituency and in and around that as well. So let me take firstly the issue in relation to air. And I agree with you, by the way. I don't want to say anything that cuts across the regulator. But they really need to step up here, Air, in terms of how they've dealt with customers. I've heard this in countless locations right across our country. So the factual position is Air have informed the telecommunications regulator Comreg that all storm-related repairs for the remaining affected customers will be completed by the 3rd of June, which is next week. Now this apparently excludes 11 cases where there's a third-party constraint like access rights outside of Air's control. So everything within their control, they're telling government, will be completed by the 3rd of June. Comreg are monitoring the restoration work until it's completed. Now, government is continuing to ensure that the resilience of the communications network and the capacity to quickly restore services in the aftermath of events such as Storm Éowyn is improved. It clearly obviously needs to improve. As you referenced, Minister O'Donovan and Minister Connolly are engaging intensively on this, and there was a meeting of what we call the Mobile Phone and Broadband Task Force last week, convened by the two ministers. The task force meeting was attended by all mobile and fixed network operators affected by Storm Éowyn. Also, Comreg, representatives of the local authorities and the ESB networks were in attendance. A key focus of the meeting was issues around network resilience and service restoration, with a view to having a firm action plan in place before the next winter to reduce the impacts that were experienced in the aftermath of Storm Éowyn. You can be sure, and knowing the Minister, I think you can be particularly sure that Minister O'Donovan at the meeting expressed his frustration regarding Air's inability to not having restored services to all customers nearly 18 weeks later. I mean, it's farcical. 18 weeks later. Minister O'Donovan has also held meetings with individual operators to address network resilience concerns. He met Vodafone, for example, last week, and he'll shortly meet with both the CEO and the owner of Air. Now, Comreg is the independent regulator, statutorily independent, and it's currently reviewing the performance of operators with regard to service restoration in the aftermath of the storm. They're also conducting a review of the applicable regulations to ensure that they're fit for purpose. And it's a matter for them then to decide whether any action needs to be taken against operators, and Comreg will send a report of this review to the Minister. So there's a couple of things: looking at the performance of operators in relation to this storm, and is there action needed by the regulator? Looking at the regulations, and do they need to be strengthened? And then from a government and operator point of view, working together, what more do we need to do in terms of resilience for future storms? On the broader issue that you've raised in relation to, and thank you for the photographs you sent to my office this morning as well in relation to this, but the other issues that you've raised in relation to forestry and timber and considering changes to the various schemes, obviously both Minister Hayden and Minister Healy-Rae here today, and they will have heard you in relation to that, I'm sure will reflect on the constructive suggestions you're making.
Thanks, Taoiseach, for your reply. I think, and I know a small bit about civil's work, it'll be a miracle. The photo I took was taken this morning, and if they're going to have all the infrastructure in place by the 3rd and Monday bank holiday, I'll be amazed. But I hope you're right, and I hope what they have said to you is correct. But I don't think it's going to come true. I would ask your government to keep the pressure on that, because this is a lot of the people that are waiting on those phone lines. For many of them, it's their only contact with the outside world, and especially the panic button is of huge importance to them. In relation to the fires that broke out in that area, I would just ask your government once again, the reconstitution grant, they need help, those people. Whatever, and in fairness to the two ministers, they have met forestry people, and you have gone out to sites where there has been wind-blown timber. This is a different scenario, and if you were available, I would ask you to come down and look at it in that area where, in my opinion, probably recklessness by someone passing a road set a fire going, and the fire basically burned a heap of forestry on people. And you know as well as I know that after 20 years it's not insured, and these people are left high and dry. You can wood chip it, that's all they've left. So they need help for the replanting of that and the reconstitution. I know Minister Healy-Rae spoke about that for the wind-blown timber. I would ask you to include those people in that, to give them, a small token of help. Thank you very much.
No, thanks very much, Leslie Corlett. Thank you, Deputy Fitzmaurice. So on the two issues, firstly, we will keep the pressure on in relation to those that don't have service. And look, I think the second point you make is one of the real learnings of the storm, isn't it? That actually when the network goes down, it's not just the loss, and I don't mean to be flippant about just the loss, but it's not just the loss of the phone, it's actually just the loss of all contact and connection with the outside world, and particularly for older people or vulnerable people or rurally isolated people, the impact of that, the stress, the mental health impact, the worry, and for their families, and going on 18 weeks later is a cause of significant concern. So ComReg as the regulator, Minister O'Donovan as the Minister will continue to intensively monitor this until it's fully resolved, and then, as I say, do that broader piece of work around what needs to change, if anything, from a regulatory point of view, and definitely changing from a building up resilience point of view. In relation to the point you make about the reconstitution grant and the difference between the issue you're raising and the windblown timber, as you've rightly said, Minister Healy-Rae, Minister Hayden are here today as the ministers with responsibility, and they will engage with you and keep in touch.